Hi, everyone. Welcome to Backstage Classical Conversations. I'm your host, Katrina Stroud, and I'm a classical violinist pursuing my master's in music at the University of Michigan. In this series, I invite esteemed classical musicians onto the show and interview them to tell their stories and give advice to share with others and preserve their legacies. Welcome to the first episode of Season 2. Thank you so much for waiting and for spreading the word about this podcast to your friends and family. If you're new to the show, I'm so glad you're here, and if you're not, welcome back. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing violinist Erin Keefe. For those of you who don't know her, Ms. Keefe is the concertmaster of the Minnesota Orchestra and joined the violin faculty of the Curtis Institute of Music in the fall of 2022. Winner of the Avery Fisher Career Grant, the Pro Musicus International Award, as well as numerous international competitions, she has appeared as a soloist with many orchestras and has given recitals throughout the United States, Europe, and Asia. Ms. Keefe has also been a frequent artist with the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. She is a member of the Accordo Ensemble and has performed frequently with the Brooklyn and Boston Chamber Music Societies. Her festival appearances have included the Marlborough Music Festival, Music at Menlo, La Jolla Summerfest, mainly Mozart, Music Academia the West, and many others. Ms. Keefe earned a Master of Music degree from the Juilliard School and a Bachelor of Music degree from the Curtis Institute of Music. Thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast. I'm so honored to have you here as my guest. So what was your musical background like, and when did you start playing the violin?
Well, I grew up in a household with no musicians. My parents are both, they were in the academic fields. And my dad always loved music. He was a big jazz fan. He played a bit of trumpet, a bit of clarinet in high school. And so he always knew that if he had a kid, he wanted them to be involved in music, at least in an amateur way.
Mhm.
So I actually started when I was about 5 or 6, but then I quit for a couple of years, actually.
Okay.
And originally, my parents wanted me to be a pianist, and so they bought a piano, and it wouldn't fit through the front door of our house. And so then they were like, "Oh, it's okay. You can practice at Smith College, where my mom worked, and you can still take lessons." But the week before my first piano lesson, the teacher who lived down the street had a stroke.
Oh my.
And she lived for like another 30 years. It was not a
Oh,
big deal.
oh.
But they were like, maybe this is a sign that piano is not your instrument, which is really good because if you look at my hands, they're very small. Um, so then I sort of resumed my violin practice, and I started with lessons in my hometown of Northampton, Massachusetts for about a year and a half. And then my dad heard about a Suzuki program at the Hart School that was just started in West Hartford, Connecticut.
Mhm.
And these very famous teachers, one was they both taught violin, but one was also an orchestra conductor.
Okay.
And so he started an orchestral program,
Hmm.
and that's why my dad wanted me to start going there so that I could do ensemble work as well, not just group class and lessons. So I started going to Hart, which is about an hour away, and I would go there twice a week, once for lessons eventually, and also on Saturdays for chamber music and for orchestra starting when I was 8. So I was very, very fortunate that when I started playing, it was also a social event because I'm not one to like to be in the practice room by myself very much. So I think that the orchestra and the quartet aspect was the part of music that really intrigued me and kept me going.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience. And who are some of your mentors growing up, and how did they influence your musical development?
Well, for sure, these two Suzuki teachers, Terry and David Einfeld. So he was my orchestra coach for 8 years and often placed me as concertmaster in very high pressure situations. So it was great because he was like, it's not enough to know your part. You need to learn how to lead.
Mhm.
And then my teacher was I'm very close to her still, actually, to this day. I try to see her a few times a year. And she was sort of like a second mother to me. She was very tough as a teacher. She wouldn't let me sort of goof off and whatever, but she was very nurturing at the same time. So I was very influenced by them,
Mhm.
as well as actually many other Suzuki teachers when I was growing up. I was heavily involved in that. And then I met Phil Setzer in high school because the Emerson Quartet was in residence at Hart at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So they coached my chamber music, and I started taking lessons with Phil, who's one of the nicest human beings on the face of the planet.
Mhm.
And he really encouraged me in a different way that I hadn't had before. So I'd had many mentors. I had great teachers growing up, which I think is kind of everything.
Yeah.
So the people you interact with and you learn and get inspired by can really chart the course for your career. And so I feel very fortunate that I happen to be around so many inspiring and great human beings as well.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. And then what led you to the Juilliard School and the Curtis Institute? And do you have any specific memories or lessons from those times?
So I did my undergrad auditions and I was pretty sure I was going to go to CIM. I had a lot of friends who were going there and it looked like a really fun place to be. But Phil and a few of my other teachers said, you need to audition at Curtis. And I was like, yeah, right. It's never going to happen. And I remember like looking at the application book like every day and being like, this looks amazing. It looks kind of like Hogwarts or something. Although Hogwarts, I don't think it existed at that time yet. But it was like, the old school wood paneled lobby. And so I auditioned at Curtis and I actually found out the night of my audition that I got in, which was shocking. And so that sort of just changed everything. And I moved to Philly and I stayed at Curtis for 5 years, as many people do.
Okay.
At the time, they didn't have a master's program, so you
Mm,
could stay 5 years and then go on to a master's.
I see.
And my first memory of Curtis was, first of all, being incredibly intimidated. Hilary Hahn was in my English class,
Oh my.
and there are all these just incredible players that I had looked up to for so long that I was now sort of colleagues with, which was very odd.
Hmm.
I remember Otto Werner Mueller, the orchestra conductor, who was incredibly intimidating. He would yell at us all the time, but learned a lot about structure and form and how to sort of approach orchestral playing. And of course, my two teachers, Ida Kavafian and Arnold Steinhardt, were just incredible. And Ida, again, turned out eventually to be sort of like a second mom to me,
Hmm.
especially when I left Curtis. We became very, very close. And so I remember very often I'd have usually every other week a lesson with one of them. So it'd be Mr. Steinhardt one week and then Ida the next week. And Mr. Steinhardt was so lovely, is so lovely and encouraging. He'd be like, "Oh, you sound great. I love this. You should play this in the hall." Um, and then I'd play the same thing for Ida the next week because I hadn't practiced much. And she'd be like, "You sound like crap. What are you doing? You need to practice." And I'd be like, "Oh." So that was sort of my memory of my Curtis experience. And then my last year, I really started to focus more on practice. I think I was so intimidated that I almost felt like it wasn't like I had no chance. And so I didn't really work that hard my first several years at Curtis, which I, of course, regret in retrospect. But my last year, I sort of realized I have to go out there, I have to do other things. And so
Mhm.
I really buckled down. I actually started doing a few competitions just as pure motivation to practice. And so when I went to Juilliard, I was sort of in a better place in terms of self motivation.
Mhm.
And I studied with Ron Copes there, which was lovely. He was great for me, especially at that time, I think, in my development. He wasn't one to spoon feed you things, but he was very inquisitive and curious and sort of made you come to your own conclusions, which was actually a great sort of bridge to being your own musician after school, because grad
Yeah.
school is only 2 years, so it's quite
Yeah.
short.
Mhm.
And so at Juilliard, it's such a bigger school. It's completely different than Curtis, and they both have their pros and cons. But I did meet many friends at Juilliard who are lifelong friends. Some of my very best friends were at school with me there, and being in the city, especially I was a little older, it was a really great experience. So the school is fine, but I think the whole idea of being in New York City, particularly being comfortable there after school, because I
Mhm.
stayed in New York for about another 5 years after that.
Okay.
That was it made my transition to post-school life much simpler, I think.
I
Having a
see.
community, but also knowing many musicians just from going to concerts and meeting them backstage.
Mhm.
So that made my transition into professional life a little smoother, I think.
Yeah. And speaking of that transition, what were some of your career goals once you had graduated, and what were you doing before you joined the Minnesota Orchestra?
So at the time when I graduated, I was doing a bunch of competitions again to make myself practice. And I just got into the Chamber Music Society in Lincoln Center in 2005, right when I graduated from Juilliard. So I
Wow.
knew that I had some safety net it turned out to be 3 years, but when we got in, it was 2 years.
Mm.
They extended it, which was a lovely surprise a couple of years later.
Mhm.
So I was doing that. I was subbing in the New Jersey Symphony. I did some subbing in Orpheus and Orchestra of St. Luke's. I did some movie soundtracks. I played with Sting on the Today Show, like all sorts of things. I basically said yes to everything that came my way because I thought it would all be a learning experience and to also sort of expand my network of musicians. I think that's a really important part of any career is knowing as many people as possible and
Mhm.
going to concerts and if there's like a cancellation for something, if they've just seen you, they're like, oh, your name pops into their head. So
Yeah.
that was a good lesson that someone had taught me. back in the day. So I
Mhm.
was doing a lot of chamber music, especially in the summer as well. And then, at some point I was like, I'd like to settle down a little bit, travel a little bit less. And so I did the Minnesota Orchestra audition. Ironically, I travel more than I've ever traveled. So that was misguided idea of what orchestral life would be. But it sort of came at the right time. So I did about
Yeah.
5 or 6 years of freelance, and then I took the Minnesota Orchestra audition, which was my first professional audition, actually.
Wow, that's amazing. And what was that orchestra audition experience like? And how did you prepare mentally for it and musically?
Well, so they had the initial concertmaster audition. Georgia Fleasonis, my predecessor, had left, I believe, in 2009, maybe 2008. And they had an audition right away, and they had a couple finalists who did trials, and it didn't work out. So then the next step was that they did another audition, and they took recommendations from orchestra members. And I think there were about 30 to 40 of us who came.
Oh, wow.
Um, and Georgia was the one who actually hooked me up with the audition. She's told the orchestra that you should listen to this girl.
Mhm.
And so it was pretty typical audition. Concertmaster auditions are generally not screened, so there was no screen.
Mm.
It was on stage at the hall. There was a large committee, larger than usual. I think there were about 15 people as opposed to
Wow.
7, so representing all sections of the orchestra. And I played 2 rounds. I played most of the excerpts. It was a pretty typical list, mostly concertmaster solos, a few section excerpts. And then at the end of that process, I was offered a trial. So the audition I remember was Halloween because I remember seeing people dressed up. So that was memorable.
Uh-huh.
And my trial was the very last week of May, I believe, after Memorial Day. So I had a long time to wait
Yeah.
in the middle of that. So, and my trial was just 1 week, but I did a recital, I did excerpts with the orchestra, and I did the normal week with the orchestra.
Yeah.
And then 2 days later, I got called into the music director's office, and I was offered the job, and I was shocked, totally shocked, and didn't expect anything to come from it, but it was a lovely surprise.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, an incredible experience. And now I'm sure you've been on many audition panels yourself as a member of the orchestra and the
Mhm.
concertmaster. So, what makes a player stand out to you in an audition behind the screen?
I think general musicality, like seeing enough personality. Of course, if you play in a completely odd way, that's not going to work. But I want to hear Schumann sound like Schumann and Bach sound like Bach and Tchaikovsky like Tchaikovsky. And of course, in any orchestra audition, attention to the score is really important. Attention to detail because during a week we have 2 rehearsals on a piece usually, and that's it. So you need to be aware of all the markings and shouldn't have to be said.
Hmm.
So often that gets people sort of knocked out of rounds when they're just making it their own piece rather than what's on the page.
Hmm.
But I think in addition to that, there's a lot that can be added to what's happening. I want to hear phrasing all the time, wide dynamic range. And you can really tell, even if someone makes a few mistakes in there, it doesn't bother me. But if they're really trying to make music, that really appeals to me quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And you were talking about how you only have like 2 rehearsals a week. What is your process for learning orchestral music quickly? And how do you balance your solo and chamber music on top of that?
Well, as the concertmaster, I do bowings far
Mhm.
ahead of time. In fact, I'm almost done with all of next season's bowings.
Wow.
And because the last few years have been much more busy than they were before, and I don't really have free days like I used to, I I get the stack of bowings way ahead of time, usually in
Mhm.
March, and I work my way through them, and I really mark up my parts so that there's not a lot for me to have to look at later. So I mark a lot of accidentals because the older you get, I just know it speeds up the process.
Yeah.
I know what key I'm in, but especially we do a lot more new music than we used to in the
Hmm.
orchestra. And so I've just found that meticulously marking my part, putting a lot of cues in or who I'm playing with, which instrument, really speeds up the process for me. And because we've gone through so much rep and it's been 15 years, I am a much faster learner than I used to be.
Hmm.
But it really helps when I have done so much preparation beforehand and really put thought into the bowings
Yeah.
and played through the piece with the recording. So when I come back to it, a few days before the rehearsal, it doesn't feel completely foreign and new to me.
I
So I
see.
think being organized about how to do it is the key for me, at least, that I really have done the work ahead of time. And then I can come back a second round and it feels much more familiar.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great process. So After being the concertmaster for 15 years, what are some things you've learned from that chair?
Oh, so much. I wish I could start over again. I really do. You have to make mistakes to really learn lessons. So
Mhm.
I think at the beginning, I didn't realize how much my physical way of playing can tell to the rest of the section. So
Mm.
sometimes, like in chamber music, you don't want to do it the same way every time. You want to have
Yeah.
different dynamics. You want to use different amounts of bow. But in orchestra, that doesn't really work as well because you have
Mhm.
15 people behind you. They can't stare at my bow the whole time.
Yeah.
So I think at the beginning, I was a little too optimistic. So now I'm very mindful of how much bow I use because especially I could be making not a lot of sound but using a ton of bow, but if everyone else does that, they might be playing much louder. I
Yeah.
might have a lot more bow speed and less weight. But so I sort of broadcast what I'm doing a little bit more mindfully.
Mhm.
I've learned particularly what not to say
Mm.
and also timings of things. Like timing really matters. So, especially when you're working with a conductor, like when do I really want to stop rehearsal to ask a question? Is this something I can
Mm.
ask during a break? Is this something I can pass back to my section, or is it quicker for me to just turn around and say something to the whole section, which also stops rehearsal in some ways?
Mhm.
So, and the whole diplomacy part I've had to learn a lot of lessons. It really matters how you are to your colleagues off stage and, you know, being approachable, of course.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think I used to come in and I was so stressed out that I would just be sort of blinders on. But I don't want people to think that I'm like unhappy. I'm not unhappy. I'm just focused.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think I've learned to be a little bit more available, but also I have to also protect my own time too sometimes. So if I'm
Mhm.
stressed out, I don't want to bring that vibe to everyone else. So I go shut myself in my office a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think that the people part is the harder part. The
Mhm.
playing part is not super difficult. So I think that we all have to remember as leaders that your demeanor on stage, your demeanor off stage are equally as important to how well you play.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you for sharing that. So I've had previous concertmasters on my podcast. I've had David Kim and Nathan Cole, but you're my first female concertmaster, which I'm super excited about. So I wanted to ask you what your experience like has been as a female concertmaster, both in terms of opportunities you've had or maybe challenges you've encountered along the way.
I was giving this some thought, and it's hard for me to decipher between age and being a female concertmaster because when I
Mm.
got my job, I had just turned 30. And so I think that some of the difficulties I encountered were probably more due to being naive and young rather
Yeah.
than being a female.
Hmm.
So it's hard for me to say. I can't say that I've had any like obvious hardships because of being a female concertmaster.
Hmm.
I think that I've always been very direct and very I'm not a very sensitive person in terms of like you can say anything to me. I'm really not going to take it personally.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
about the music. And
Hmm.
so I think that that helps
Hmm.
and being direct so people know exactly where I stand helps with that. I would say maybe in the last few years being a female concertmaster has afforded me more invitations to things. I think people are more aware of sort of the gender gap that's there.
Hmm.
Whether I decide to take advantage of those things is a different decision. But
Yeah.
I think that for me, the gender part hasn't come into it as much as one would think
Yeah. Well,
for me
that's great.
personally. But
That's
I've
great to
only
hear.
been in one orchestra professionally, so who knows if I
Yeah.
moved around.
Yeah. And you've also been a guest concertmaster with many other orchestras. So, what is it like stepping into that leadership role with ensembles other than your own?
Now I'm really comfortable with it. At the very beginning, it was more pressureful, I would say. Like when I was concertmaster with New York Phil for a few weeks, it was my second year of being a concertmaster, and I was still pretty green at that point. It takes a while to get comfortable, I think, in the seat.
Hmm.
So I wish I could go back and do that again. I think I would do it differently.
Hmm.
But then in more recent years, going in, it's very comfortable. It's fun. I usually know people in the orchestra.
Yeah.
Now, after so many years, you know how to read basically every kind of conductor within the first 2 minutes of rehearsal. So that
Hmm.
part's not stressful. But it's really quite interesting to see how other orchestras function.
Hmm.
I think my orchestra is very much like a chamber group. And so the principal strings were very interactive with each other and
Hmm.
as well as the winds. So we're listening all the time. And it feels really comfortable. Other orchestras I've been to sometimes it feels like you're just following the stick, and that's
Mm.
difficult because everyone can read that quite differently rather
Yeah.
than like watching a bow.
Hmm.
And so often I come back to my orchestra and happy and relieved, and I know what I have, and I should be thankful for it. So,
Yeah.
it's always an educational experience, I think, to go to other orchestras.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure it's a slight adjustment as well, possibly playing under different conductors and in different halls. Have you experienced any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the old Avery Fisher Hall was atrocious to play in. It was so dry. It felt really bad. I haven't played in the new one, which I hear is so much better.
Mhm.
Um, but we have a very nice hall. It's really easy to hear, and so that makes life a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And conductors, I mean, that's something that just takes getting used to. I when I teach orchestra stuff at other festivals or at Curtis or New World, I can see how people struggle to know when to play, but
Mm.
I think eventually, especially with a professional orchestra, the orchestra's gonna play together if they're a good orchestra. They're
Yeah.
gonna watch each other and follow each other, and so the conductor is more about interpretation rather than pure ensemble as much.
Mm. Hmm.
But in like a college or grad school setting, that's a different thing. It's a different kind of playing an orchestra, which I think is harder actually. I think if
Yeah.
a college student were to step into a professional orchestra and play with them for a week, they'd see that it's actually much easier
Hmm. Very
because
interesting.
we've honed our skills and know how to play together despite or hopefully sometimes because of what's on the podium.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, very interesting. And so you're also an active chamber musician through, as you said, the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center and other programs. So, what do you find to be the value in balancing both chamber music and orchestral performance in your career?
I love doing a bit of everything, and I think for me, doing chamber music outside of orchestra is totally like the most important thing I can do in some ways because it makes me think about music in a different way.
Mm.
In the orchestra, I actually am very responsible for still making music all the time, much more than I ever thought happened in an orchestra. The
Mhm.
conductor can only do so much. But when I'm playing chamber music, everything I do is heard. So I need to
Yeah.
make sure, first of all, that I sound good all the time. And
Mm.
I hopefully sound good in orchestra too, but sometimes not always. Um, so it's a more, again, diplomatic, sort of democratic
Mm.
way of making music.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit more, you can be more flexible in a chamber group than you can be with an orchestra. There's more change that's possible. And so I find myself actually much more free than I used to be in chamber
Mm.
music. I used to worry about every note and every phrase and every concert so much. But after playing, I don't know how many orchestra concerts I play a year, almost 100. I don't know.
Wow.
The concert situation is a different vibe. It's a little less stressful because I do it so much. And so
Mhm.
I feel a little more free. And I feel like I can be in the moment more, which I really enjoy. So I think for me, I can't imagine a career without playing chamber music,
Yeah.
along with everything else I do.
Yeah, for sure. And you've done so many amazing collaborations with so many other great musicians. Do you have one that is particularly memorable to you that sticks out to you?
Oh, wow. I would say one of the most memorable concerts I had was with Leon Fleischer when he came back to play. So he was probably in his 80s, I'm guessing.
Wow.
And it was the Brahms Piano Quintet. It was with Ida Kovafian and Paul Neubauer and Fred Sherry.
Wow.
And so I was the youngest member by 20 something years. And it was probably the slowest first movement I've ever played of that piece before, but it was like so magical. And to play with Leon Fleischer, whose recordings I have admired for so long, especially in my 20s, I got all these opportunities to play with these incredible musicians, and it just blew my mind. Even
Mhm.
looking back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was incredibly fortunate
Yeah.
to get to
Mhm.
do all these things.
Mhm.
And I appreciate it at the time, but even more now, it's pretty great that people were willing to give opportunities to younger musicians. Like CMS, Chamber Music Society, was really good about that. They really,
Yeah.
threw you right into the thick of things.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a junior and senior sort of situation. It was just you're all in it together,
Yeah.
which I'm sure was hard for the senior members at the time, being like, "Who are these kids?" And like they don't have that much experience. But getting to do tours with them and live from Lincoln Center, and then doing all the chamber music in the festivals in the summer is still such a highlight. And so, yeah, I think that when I look back at the career stuff, it's just still blows my mind that I get to do all these great things.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you're now a faculty member at Curtis. What did it mean to be asked to serve as a faculty member at your former school?
First of all, I'm still surprised. I can't believe it. This is the end of my 4th year, and I'm still shocked that I'm teaching there. In fact, I remember when it happened, I was at dinner with Roberto Diaz and my husband, And my husband had conducted at Curtis quite a few times. And so I thought it was just a social dinner and maybe they'd ask Osmo to conduct a concert. And it was at the end of the dinner. I think we'd all had we shared a bottle of wine. So, I was happy and relaxed and whatever. And Roberto turns to me and he was like, "How do you feel about joining the faculty at Curtis?" I think I was like, "Shut up. What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "No, really." And I was like, I mean, I can't even explain the great joy and excitement and wonder. I can still kind of remember that feeling for hours after. I called every friend, all my best friends, and
Yeah.
um, just couldn't believe it because, you know, I would say that was sort of my dream end game. Like
Mhm.
20 years from now, if I could teach at a school, let alone Curtis, would be such an honor and such a great sort of second part of my career.
Mhm.
So I would say that it came much earlier than I thought it would,
Yeah.
but that's not something you say no to.
Yeah.
So even though I knew that it would complicate my life in all sorts of ways, um, I was just so thrilled and so honored, and I still am. And it's been so fun now. Like, actually, next week, my first student is graduating. So I've taught her for 4 years
Wow.
and she's moving on. It's mind blowing to think that that's already happened. So it's, it's really fun. I have to say, at the end of the semester, like right now, I'm really tired because I haven't had a free day in ages. Um, but it is really inspiring and energizing
Mhm.
to go there every week and work with these incredible students, and I learn so much. I feel like I've become a much better teacher in the last 4 years than I was when I started.
Yeah, that's great. And what would you say are some of your teaching methods or your teaching philosophy?
Each student is so different, and at a place like Curtis, the technical level's already so high, so there's not a lot that I have to do changing their setup so much. Usually, I'm trying to get them to think as musically as possible, as much about the composer, looking at the score, how does your part interact? And that's actually been a really something I didn't anticipate is how helpful my orchestral background and
Mhm.
knowing all these concerti from the orchestra part as well,
Mm,
how
mhm.
helpful that is because I can tell the students like the orchestra's going to be late here. You can't take time here. You can't do this because just fundamentally when you have 100 people behind you,
Yeah.
there's only so much flexibility that's there.
Mm, mhm.
And so I found that helpful. But, I also do bowing sessions with the orchestra principals, which
Mm.
I do with bowings all the time. So it's not something I love doing, but it's really great to sort of teach them how it's done. I wish I had
Mm.
had that sort of education when I was in school. And so I wouldn't say that I have a philosophy, but I approach each student and just see what I feel like their needs are. If they need motivation, I assign them 5 Paganini Caprices for next week. If they, are practicing too much, I insist that they practice less and get less done, but really well. And so
Mm.
often I find with my new students, I'll take 1 or 2 lessons near the beginning of their time there and actually practice with them. I tell them to bring a piece that they have never seen
Hmm.
or never seen. I mean, they've heard all these pieces. So something that they know by ear perhaps, but they haven't actually touched with their instrument.
Mhm.
And we have a practice lesson. So I show them exactly what I would do to approach it. And I find that helpful because I think that often students actually don't start slow enough when it's a new piece. Like I start insanely slowly just to solidify my left hand so that it's automatic pilot later and I don't have to go back and fix things. Hopefully
Mm.
everything is ingrained from the beginning.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you see my studio now, all the students are so wildly different from one another, and I don't want to make them sound the same.
Mhm.
I want to make them sort of even better versions of what they are and their strengths, and make sure by the end of the time at Curtis, they have a really well-rounded education in terms of repertoire. I always really encourage them to take chamber music and orchestra quite seriously. You know, they don't need to be orchestra musicians. That's totally fine. But I want them to know how to play an orchestra. I want them to know generally how to lead well. So that means chamber music and orchestra. And so I find that I'm always very happy when my students graduate because I know that they're well-rounded musicians and they sort of have the opportunity to do whatever they want to do later.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And how do you prepare your students for orchestra auditions?
First of all, I tell them not to learn the excerpts too early.
Mm.
I don't think that, practicing Don Juan every day for 5 years for an audition is helpful. I think I encourage them to become the best musicians and violinists they can, and then to learn these excerpts because I
Mm.
think you come at it with a different mindset too often excerpts sound like etudes to me. They're just so ingrained
Yeah.
that there's not a lot of like natural music making happening in the moment. And so I do not prepare them well ahead of time. If they say that they want to take an audition, which usually happens their last year, then we start working on the list. At Curtis, we don't have a rep class or anything, but I
Mm,
hear people from different instruments. Like next week, actually, I'm hearing a horn player is taking a third horn audition.
okay.
So that's fun to do, but I
Mhm.
don't think that, at least in string playing, it's that helpful for them to learn excerpts for years and years before they take an audition.
I see.
Take it one step at a time, become a great musician, become your own musician, and then learn the list a month or two before the audition.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And another question about your orchestral experience. Do you still get nervous before concerts ever? And do you have any pre-concert rituals?
Um, it's pretty rare that I get nervous. I would say the only time I get nervous playing music these days is if I have to do it from memory, because I do it
Mm,
so infrequently now. Like I was a Suzuki kid. I used to memorize everything.
yeah.
And I can memorize it, but I second guess myself
Mm,
way too
mm,
much. So that is a totally mental thing. I don't really have memory slips when I play from memory, but I always worry about it, which is
yeah.
not helpful. Um, so other than that, like I could get a little bit slightly anxious, but I don't get nervous. I don't get shaky. Again, I think once you join an orchestra, you play so many concerts that it's sort of, I don't want to say it like numbs me to the pressure, but I'm used to dealing with it
Mhm,
so much. So I would say at the
yeah.
beginning, some orchestra solos they come out of nowhere. That was a little scary, but now there's not much. The only one that scares me is Dvorak 8 because I learned it so poorly the first time. And then I think the first time I played it, it was like okay, but not great. Second time I was better. Third time I didn't have to play it, and this time I took that week off. I just don't really want to play that solo ever again. Like my stand partner's so good at it; she's great. So every time I see Dvorak 8, I'm like, well, it's a week I'm going to take off.
That's
So
funny.
that's a little sad for me. I should just you know, I should just do it and make myself do it, but I'm not going to. So not yet anyway.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, I don't get too nervous, but I'm also very good at compartmentalizing in my life in general. And so I
Yeah.
think that's something that I've learned to sort of do in orchestra concerts as well.
Yeah. And do you have any pre-concert rituals?
Generally I try to take a nap the day of a concert.
Mhm.
Today's a concert day, so after this I'll have lunch and then probably take a nap. And other than that, no. Like I eat normally. I used to eat after concerts, but now I'm too old for that. So I need to eat beforehand. What do I do? No, I warm up. It depends what the program is, how much I warm up. If I have a
Mm.
solo near the beginning, yes. Actually, yesterday I had the order reversed in my head, and the first piece I thought we were playing was super easy and a good warm up. It's slow for a while, and then it gets fast. But it actually turned out we were starting with the other piece where there's lots of little solos where like
Oh.
4 violins, the front stands, and it's kinda slow, so my vibrato was like, so it got faster progressively as I went on. But tonight,
That's
I will not make that mistake, and I
fun.
will be properly warmed up when I go on stage.
I see, yes. And, who do you turn to for advice today?
Lots of people. My husband, sometimes he's a conductor. Ida Kavafian for a lot of teaching things because I
Mm,
really
mhm,
admire her teaching. She's so devoted. Who else? Yeah, it kind of depends on what it is. Sometimes other concertmasters, depending
mm,
on the situation, like what would you do in this situation? And my friends, all of my friends are actually great musicians. They happen to be great musicians.
mhm.
So if it's like something political at work or at school, I always sort of run my opinions or my options by them, and I trust them. They know me well enough. I also know who to go to when I want to hear what I want to hear, and I know who to go to when I have to hear what I don't want to hear.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that, those of us in the music field, it's so small. And
Mhm.
so hopefully most of us have a lot of friends that are in similar situations like we are. And I found that really helpful over the years.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been such a great interview, and I always like to close with this one question. What advice do you have for aspiring professional musicians?
There are a lot of things I can think of. First of all, I think that it's good not to be too sensitive. It's a learning environment. I'm still learning. I love when people give me feedback, like when my stand partner tells me I'm sharp or I'm flat on something. I find that really helpful, not offensive.
Mm,
Um,
mhm,
it's not personal. It's an instrument. It's not a attack on you personally. I
mhm.
think also say yes to a lot of things when you're young. Don't limit yourself and decide that this is the path I want to take and I'm going to stay on it because often you'll be surprised. To be concertmaster is shocking to me. If you'd told me this 22 years ago, probably I never had any idea that I would be in an orchestra. I thought I'd probably be in a quartet.
Wow.
So I think stay open and remember that the people you surround yourself with, they're going to be your colleagues forever. The people at school. So sort of how you behave now can affect things later for you in your professional career.
Mhm.
And I think go to as many concerts as you can. You learn from everything. Even when I was in competitions, I would watch everyone else play even
Mhm.
before I played because I found it really helpful to see how their stage presence affected their playing.
Mhm.
And I would sort of analyze what I liked and what I didn't like. And I did competitions myself to motivate myself to practice, but also to sort of use it as an experiment as to how I function under pressure. So I
Mm.
would
Yeah.
actually do a lot of experimentation about what I think about when I think about it, doing different things before I play. And I find that really helpful now that I was taking risks then for a bigger payoff later. So I
Yeah.
think, you know, always be open to situations and learn from them.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. And thank you so much for this really inspiring interview.
You're so welcome. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you so much to Erin Keefe for sharing her career story and wisdom about performing as an orchestral and chamber musician. I also loved hearing of how she became a teacher at Curtis and her teaching approach with new students. Thank you so much for joining me on Backstage Classical Conversations. If you liked this interview, please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on the platform you're using. You can follow us at Backstage Classical Podcast on Instagram or visit the website at backstageclassicalpodcast.com for more episodes and information. I'm Katrina Stroud, and it was great to see you here. Until next time, stay inspired and listen to the stories of others.